let's do it. So welcome everyone, as I said, to day two. I'll just do some quick introductions while more people come into the waiting room, and then I'll pass it over to our presenters. So I'm Torrin Liddell. I'm a state researcher in Indiana, but I'm also the board secretary of IDRA. IDRA, if you don't know, is the Indigent Defense Research Association. We're a loose collection of academic and government researchers, practitioners, regulators, and many other types of people that are all interested in data and public defense and kind of making public defense better using data. We have recently launched a new website. So anything you would like to learn about IDRA is available many places, but most centrally at indigentdefenseresearch.org. That website is new. That the URL is not, but the website is new. So we've got some new functionality there. Primarily, we are working on building a research database. So right now, we just have all the things that IDRA has essentially announced as a notable publication. If you subscribe to our listserv, you get those notable publication emails. Please check that out. We're working on ways to expand that to include other papers, but we're hoping it'll be a useful resource that is kind of many or someday maybe all indigent defense research. And again, we're not hosting that. Like we aren't hosting those papers just out of copyright concerns, but if links exist, those links will be there. If not, at least you can hopefully find those papers other ways. And lastly, I'll say we are entirely volunteer and donation driven. So if you want to go to indigentdefenseresearch.org/donate, we greatly appreciate that. A small amount of money goes a long way. We have very low expenses because we are totally volunteer driven, but those expenses are really important. They allow us to put on things like this conference. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Andy and the other presenters.
Thank you, Torrin. I couldn't be more delighted to be here, and thank you all for sharing your precious time with us. We're having a panel this, I was about to say this afternoon, but of course I realize we're from across the country. So from wherever you are, we're going to talk about the Census of Public Defender Offices, which is a new iteration of a data collection that the Bureau of Justice Statistics is pursuing. This is absolutely the right time to be talking about it, because the census is a survey instrument that's gone out to the field just in the last few weeks. And this is absolutely the right group to have talking about it, because IDRA is a mixed community of practicing defenders who are interested in data and of researchers who are interested in data about defenders. This is the group that I think has the greatest sort of cross-section of interest in this particular data collection effort. At the same time, because of the timing of the effort and because of the fact that it comes under the auspices of the Bureau of Justice Statistics from the Department of Justice, there are lots and lots of questions that people reasonably have about how it's being conducted and what it's for. And in fact, the Census of Public Defenders Offices hasn't been done for 18 years, so it's perfectly understandable that people feel unfamiliar. So the people we have on the panel today are, in addition to myself, who I'm known as a co-principal investigator on the project, which is to say I'm just one of the researchers that helps out. We also have Heather Hall, formerly of the National Association of Public Defense. I don't want to mischaracterize your affiliation, Heather, but also Heather is a co-principal investigator on the project. We have Tina Luongo from the New York City Legal Aid Society, and we have Dr. Aaron Gottlieb, a researcher from Chicago who has previously used the 2007 data in his work. And last but not least, we also have Ryan Kling from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, who is, I suppose, I'm not sure how to characterize it right. I'll ask folks to introduce themselves in a moment, but is certainly the program officer at BJS responsible for that work. I'm going to kick us off in a moment with some PowerPoint slides, where I'm going to talk about the project a little bit just to get folks oriented. But most of the panel will be given over to discussion among our panelists about the issues that we're hearing from the field, the possible resolutions that might be in the offing in the way that either people interact with the data collection or the way that BJS handles it. And we hope and expect that people who are in the room also will pitch in with questions and answers. And I'll be asking you to do the usual little raise hand thing if you have something to add. So before I go into the slides, could I pass it to, let's see, I'll pass it to you, Ryan Kling, and then you can pass to one of our other folks just to introduce yourself properly.
Thanks, Andy. I'm Ryan Kling. I'm the program manager of BJS for the CPDO. I've been at BJS almost a year and a half. Before that, I was doing a lot of research, particularly around either the federal justice system and human trafficking, drug trafficking, and a lot of HIV research. But I'm been in research for 22 years. I'm a statistician and programmer, and I am probably the least knowledgeable person about indigent defense here, but I'm trying to keep up. I'll pass it to Heather.
Awesome. Andy's intro of me was sufficient for sure. I spent almost 10 years at the National Association for Public Defense, and I've been working on this project since the beginning and the survey of public defenders before that, and had my on-the-ground experience in Louisiana's public defender system for 8 years, from Hurricane Katrina till 2005, or from 2005 until 2012. All right. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Over to Tina, please.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Tina Luongo. I'm the chief attorney at the Legal Aid Society in New York City. I'm the chief attorney of the criminal defense practice and been a lifelong public defender for over 20 years. I am involved in in lots of different ways, wearing lots of different sort of hats in the national public defense space, including being a member of NAPD when it first launched, to being a current board member at NLADA, as well as being the past chair of the Chief Defenders Association of New York and the past immediate chair of the criminal justice section of the American Bar Association. So within sort of that space, recognize the importance data does play in not only the work we do on behalf of clients, but the building of resources and the resources we need much in the funding space, as well as utilizing data to help us do our policy work that's critically important to the clients and the communities we serve. And I will kick it over to Aaron.
Thank you, Tina. So I'm Aaron Gottlieb. I'm an associate professor at the University of Chicago's Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. And generally, I research criminal legal reform and how to make sure it's done in an equitable way. And I previously have used the prior iteration, or the last 2 iterations of this survey, actually, to look at how caseloads in public defender offices impact outcomes for defendants, not surprisingly finding that higher caseloads lead to worse outcomes, and that occurs for all racial and ethnic groups. So anyway, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you all. So without further ado, what I'm going to do, and there will be the customary hiatus while I get my slideshow actually operational. What I'm going to do is share some slides. Now, what I'm doing now is at least 2 things. The first thing is I'm trying to preview some of the issues that I think we've heard from the field about about folks' concerns with this survey and how it's being done right now. That will tee up a conversation that I expect will ensue after the presentation, and we'll go much more deeply into. The other thing I'm also trying to do is something called a data walk. A data walk you might be familiar with. It's something that I just came across. It's where you share data with a community of interested people, and you get their reactions to it. And it's just one of the many ways that people try to actually disseminate their findings, but also have the people most affected by them reflect their response to them from their professional position. Now, the Census of Public Defender offices, in large part, I think, the community that is interested is the research community and the public defense community. So I will be just sharing some information that we learned back in 2007, and it will be interesting to see if people find that interesting. There is also, from my personal position as somebody who's worked on this project for 20 years, a secret agenda there, which is I hope that people get excited about the idea of having this kind of data, and I hope that that translates into people's responses to the actual data collection effort itself. That said, I think that there's a much larger conversation about that data collection effort and how we respond to it as a community. So you can, if you like, take this as an exercise in cheerleading. I don't think that that would be very fair to me, but see what you think, and then we'll take it from there. Let's see. So, as I said, now we'll figure out how to actually do what I'm trying to do. All right. Here we go. I would promise that this will be fast, but I know myself too well. So I will. But I will certainly try and not take too much time, because this is probably the least important of what we're doing. Okay, why am I apologize. You would think that after whatever it is, 5 years post-pandemic, we would all be really, really good at sharing PowerPoints, but and yet here we are. Okay, I'm hoping now that you can see it. I believe that you can. So Census of Public Defender offices. All right, this is a new effort, as I said, about by the Bureau of Justice Statistics to collect for the first time in 18 years, well, first time since 2007, a portrait of the state of public defender offices around the country in 2024. So actually, if this is successful, there will be a 17-year gap. The questions on the census instrument are about offices. They ask about some timeless issues like how many cases people are handling, how many attorneys they have on staff, what their expenditures or what their budget is every year. These are the key metrics that we use all the time in policy conversations about public defense and indigent defense, because we want to know if people are overloaded with caseloads, and we want to know how much resources people have as they approach their caseloads and that kind of thing. So these are just key components of information that go into our policy conversation just daily. It also has some questions on some issues that are emerging, like attrition. That is to say, people leaving the field, attorneys quitting their jobs, and the difficulties in hiring that folks are having. There are two questions in there. One asks how many people have left the office in the last year. One asks how many open positions you've got at a date certain, I think in the last year as well. Because these are issues that we know have come up in the field now. There are also questions about how much video discovery you're actually handling. The development of this allows me to say that the development of the 2025 questions referring to 2024 was something that we took a couple of years over. It was something that we gathered an expert committee of public defenders from around the nation, some of them, to actually talk about what questions this new survey would address. At the same time, we kept a lot of the questions from 2007 so that we could look at how changes were happening. But we also ditched some of the questions from 2007 that were no longer particularly germane to the current situation. I also want to say, by the way, that the questions in the census are, with a few notable exceptions that we can go into, are not about people and individuals. They are just about offices and the sort of aggregate picture of those places. The data are only published if enough people respond. So the BJS has a lot of different ways, and Ryan will be able to talk about this much more specifically, has a lot of different criteria that should be met before data are considered sort of high quality enough to actually be used and publicized or analyzed at all. The usual sort of rule of thumb is that they want a response rate of about 80%. I understand but I'm not a statistician, so I'm not qualified to say. I understand that there are all kinds of ways of working around that if you don't quite get there, but you really want to get about 80% of, in this case, public defender offices responding to the survey before BJS will even make the information public. That applies on the one hand to the whole survey, but it also applies to individual questions. And it's worth saying that in 2007, the survey did receive such a response rate, but not every question did. And so what that means is if you go and look at the 2007 data, there are some pieces of data that were published, like how many cases did public defender offices handle that year? About 5.5 million, apparently. How many attorneys worked in them? About 15,000. How many public defender offices were there? Stuff like that. But there are other questions that were in the survey that have never been published because there are just not enough people responding to them. So that this response rate to the whole survey and to individual items changes whether BJS uses the data or publishes it or not, which is interesting. And I think we might come back to that. In 2007, the BJS published several reports with national numbers saying the stuff that I just said about the 15 million, no, the 5.5 million cases and so on. It also published data sets. They're a little bit hard to find, but you still can find them. The complete data set of all the responses, including identifiable information about each office attached to those responses, is available. You can find it. And so if you want to sort of look up your county, you might be able to, if they were among the people who responded, you would be able to find it. This, I think we might come back to as well, because it's not necessarily the case that BJS does this every time, and it's not necessarily the case that the data set, if it's published, will contain those identifiers that would allow you to link data back to counties. But that's something that we should talk about more because of the to understand the choices that BJS has. Some highlights from the 2007 data. This is where I really get into cheerleading mode. There are a couple of ways that I think about the way that the 2007 data are used, and one is that they come up in national conversations. So they come up in really high-profile places. You might know the 2013 film Gideon's Army from which features John Rapping's organization in particular. There's a still at the very beginning of this movie that says this. That number comes from the BJS data. If there were no BJS data, this still in John Rapping's movie wouldn't exist. You might have seen John Oliver's piece on this about 10 years ago about public defenders. He, at this one point, literally pulled up the 2007 numbers in order to make the point that back in 2007, 40% of county-based public defender offices had no investigators. That's a fact that he could use because it was collected in this context. This is Dr. Gottlieb's work also. This work that Dr. Gottlieb did, and maybe you'll talk about it more expansively. There are two papers actually. This is one of the few examples of empirical work that actually looks at the impact of caseloads. And I'm eliding because Dr. Gottlieb has done more than this. But in as much as caseloads and the impact of having too many cases and the consequences that has for clients is basically the most important policy discussion in our entire field. Dr. Gottlieb's work using the BJS data in 2007 is one of the quite small number of empirical attempts to demonstrate the impact of high caseloads on outcomes for clients. So that's something that relied on the existence of these data. These are national pictures, as I say. Oh, and then also Justice Breyer. So the Supreme Court also cited it in this Luis decision in 2016, where Justice Breyer pulled out the number that 27% of public defender offices at the county level had only 27% had enough attorneys given their caseloads. This is based on the 1973 National Advisory Commission standards for how many caseloads a public defender office should be able to handle, which, as you know, was superseded in 23. But nevertheless, that piece of information and Justice Breyer's ability to rely on it is only present because of the BJS's work. There were 957 public defender offices back in 2007. The BJS divided them into 530 in 27 states that were, quote, county-based, and 22 states with 427 offices in them that were state administered. There's one state missing, of course, which back in 2007 was Maine, which had no public defender offices at that time and just about has one now. And we obviously don't have any data from 2024 yet because we haven't done the data collection, with one exception, which is that NAPD has, in the last 2 years, drawn up a new list of public defender offices around the nation in order to send the survey out, which was sent out in the last month or so. And so I can tell you something completely new, which nobody else knows, which is that whereas in 2007 there were 957 public defender offices on the list that BJS used, in 2024 NAPD was able to locate 1,436 public defender offices in the nation. NAPD also developed, which is it's just remarkable. I mean, if you want a sense of how the field may have changed without knowing anything about those offices, you can at least know that it's about 50% bigger than it was. NAPD's also developed a more nuanced breakdown of those offices. In particular, the county-based offices are now broken into county-based and hybrid offices, and the hybrid offices have more state oversight than the county-based ones. And then they have this other group as well, which contains Florida and Puerto Rico, both of which are a bit difficult to categorize. Anyway, so that's all we know about 2024 so far, because nobody's responded to the survey. I will just close by walking through some of the findings in 2007. It's traditional in the data walk to ask the community, as they look at the data that you're showing to them, what surprises you about this information, and what's the good news and what is the bad news. Here's a fact to start with. Back in 2007, the average public defender office had just 7 attorney staff. I think that's really interesting. I think that sometimes our public defender conversation is understandably focuses on large urban areas with really big offices. Most public defender offices are actually pretty small. Using the data back in 2007, BJS did break this out by the different sizes of office in terms of caseload. This is one thing that they're able to do. For offices that are handling less than 1,000 cases, actually the average number of attorneys was 2. If offices that were handling over 5,000 cases, the average number of attorneys was 32. This kind of breakout, I think, is just interesting. If you're a chief public defender, you can kind of locate yourself on that range and say, where do I sit? And this is one thing, in contrast to those sort of big national numbers, this is one thing that I think is interesting for a public defender. And if you're a chief defender, I would be really interested to hear from folks in the room about, how would you maybe use these data? Are there points of data here where you would deliberately sort of compare yourself to the national average and say, well, we're doing better or we're doing worse? Either of which can be useful in advocacy, depending on the context, I think. Also, and this is really interesting. I've literally got 5 slides to go, so I promise I won't take too much of your time, but I just thought this was really interesting. BJS also distinguished the extent to which these different categories of office were overloaded. And again, this is using the 1973 standards on caseloads. But what they concluded was that in the offices that were taking fewer than 1,000 cases a year, so the smallest offices in the country, about 40% of them had more cases than they could handle with their attorney staff. That is to say, 60% of them actually were meeting caseload standards, but 40% weren't, these older caseload standards. But as you go up, as you go to offices that were taking as much as 2,500 cases, 77% of them were overloaded. As you go to even larger offices, 84% of the offices were overloaded with cases, and the largest offices were the most likely to be overloaded with cases. I got to admit, that's something I just didn't know. But it is very interesting to think that, the rural offices and the larger offices, well, we're meeting standards to different degrees. I wouldn't necessarily conclude that the rural offices were not overloaded, but clearly the resource to caseload ratio is different in those places. That's very thought-provoking. And I think it is something that, is information you'd want to use if you're advocating for resources in the public defense space, and you could use it lots and lots of different ways. It's thought-provoking to me anyway. Just a small number of other thought-provoking statistics. Back in 2007, in the state-administered public defender offices, that is to say, places like Colorado, where you've got a consolidated state operation doing public defense. Those offices in not only Colorado, but 22 states had a 10% attrition rate in 2007. That is to say that the proportion of attorneys that left the office in the course of 2007 was equal to 10% of the total attorney staff. I put that up there because I think it's interesting, because we have just gone through and may still be going through an attrition crisis in public defense. Certainly there was a lot of talk about it in 22 or 23. Back in 2007, public defender office, again in state administered public defender programs, had one investigator for about every 6 attorneys. That's an interesting ratio. It's certainly not in compliance with the MAPD standards today. And the proportion of county-based public defender offices in the United States in 2007 reporting that their representation was vertical, that is, provided by one attorney from arraignment to disposition, 71% in 2007. So again, interesting to think how your office might be situated relative to that. And the very last one, among the state-administered public defender offices in the 22 states where they were state-administered, just half of them took into account a person's incarceration when they were determining if people were eligible for appointed counsel. So that's a question about eligibility, which is also in the 2025 set of questions referring to 2024. I shall stop there. I think that what I would like to do then is I would love to hand it to my co-panelists in turn, just to get reactions and preliminary comments, and then we shall allow the conversation simply to flow from there. So could I ask first Tina, then Aaron, and then Ryan, and then Heather, just to provide us your initial thoughts, and then we'll start a conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andy. I think this is really helpful, and glad that in our preparation we were talking about why it's really important, in particular for chief defenders or data officers of chief defenders, to really understand why the gathering of this data was important, certainly in 2007, but also right now in 2025, and how we have to sort of think about how to balance. And let me say, for everybody on here, and my co-panelists know this, I have not signed off yet on Legal Aid Society doing the survey yet. I'm one of the people who many chiefs are, and so if you're a chief on here, I totally see you pausing in this moment about submitting it. But after sort of going through this data and thinking about all the ways in which it is important, and realizing we have to have conversations about how to protect this data and how to protect the offices who are participating, and more importantly, and what drives all of our concerns is how do we protect the clients and communities in which we serve right now in this moment in this country. I do think it's important for us to say, in order for us to move our agenda forward, I'm in office, I have more than 32 lawyers, the Legal Aid Society. I think we're a unionized shop, and I actually, right now I'm in bargaining, so I know the total number across all 3 of our practices is 1,050 attorneys. About 75% of them are in the criminal practice, so about 750 to 800 of my team are lawyers. And then social workers, paralegals, investigators, litigation assistants, administrators, and managers. Why in this moment? We continue to need to drive home why caseloads, and let me correct myself, why workload is at an all-time high, even if we are seeing the number of people being arrested and prosecuted on misdemeanors, why the workload is skyrocketing because of things like video, body-worn cameras, the terror. But look, good news in New York, we had discovery reform, but now there's clearly an obligation to review it, as it always should have been. But workload is on a high. Cost of living in New York certainly places, many places across this country, particularly metro areas, cost of living is becoming astronomical, but our salaries are not keeping pace because our funders need to understand this data and understand the importance of keeping experienced felony trained attorneys. All of this is really important. And so I appreciate the story that the 2007 slides likely says right now, which is we are not doing any better. And in fact, maybe in some ways worse. But we don't know that. And thinking about our obligations to tell that story because it matters to the people both on our teams that rely on us to tell it as chiefs, but more at the heart of it, our clients and the communities we serve. So I'll turn it back to the panel for that, for initial response.
Thanks, Tina. I think go ahead, Aaron, please.
Oh, sure. So so thank you, Tina, Andy. And yeah, so I think the data is really powerful, as Andy did a really good job illustrating. As a researcher, it's the only national source of this kind of data. So, I mean, I think it's really an invaluable tool in that regard. I also completely understand some of the concerns around kind of protecting people and offices, especially in this moment. So I fully grasp that. And I do think that there are important trade-offs for us to discuss today that I'm sure we'll get into more in the Q&A. I'll give one example just because I think it's the kind of thing we should be discussing. So my understanding is that, well, first let me back up real quick. So one other thing that I think is important to note that Andy mentioned is that almost all the questions focus on the aggregate and not the individual. So at this point, I think that is really important because individual people, I mean, certainly you can kind of, if you want to, you can figure out like who's the chief public defender here, who's, so things like that. But in terms of like protecting individuals, there is some protection built in there. But right now, so getting to like the point of like one of the things that I think will be important to kind of discuss is right now, my understanding is that the data would be sort of constructed in a way where you would get a picture for the entire country, or at least of all the places surveyed, but you wouldn't be able to kind of look at it office by office. And that definitely protects privacy, but there are some real trade-offs about what we can learn if we do it that way. So for instance, the study that I conducted, or the studies I conducted looking at the effects of sort of workload and caseloads on case outcomes could not be conducted because you wouldn't be able to link data from public defender offices to like data on cases and outcomes, right? So I think there are clear pros and cons to that. I don't think there's a right answer, and finding the right balance is something that's really important. Of course, if nobody agrees to submit the survey, then the survey doesn't serve any function. So I think we certainly need to make sure to protect privacy and allay those concerns as well. So I think it's a really like challenging thing to think through, and I'm looking forward to having those kinds of conversations.
Thank you. I see we've got some good questions in the chat, and Lindsay Bendell already has their hand up. Thank you. I want to give Heather and Ryan an opportunity just to offer some comments, and then we'll plow straight into those. Ryan, are you ready to go next?
Sure. So I just want to touch upon a couple things that Tina and Aaron bring up, because they're the things that we're thinking about. And then we'll get to the questions, because we want to answer everybody's questions. BJS, as you can see, BJS has a long history of wanting to study kind of indigent defense. It goes back to the 90s, but really the most recent data are 2007 for this project, the CPDO. There's been some other studies. The National Survey of Indigent Defense Systems from 2013 was the most recent iteration that has tried to look at it. But that is the last time that BJS has done anything, and part of that is BJS at that time had some budget issues, had to make some choices, and unfortunately, most of our courts portfolio was set aside for a bit. And this is a big part of our kind of the rebirth and reimagining of what we should be discussing with courts. So public defense is a huge part of that. So this is something that we have a history with. We want to continue doing it. We want to continue enumerating it. BJS itself is independent of the Department of Justice. It's one of the 13 statistical agencies across the federal government, and the Evidence Act of 2018 kind of coalesces and solidifies the statistical agency's independence. And that's really importantly for us. Data that we collect can't be used for investigation. It can really only be used for research or enumeration. So the reports that Andy talked about, the Aaron's research, those are the only things it can be used for. Those are the only things that we can be that it's allowed to be used for. I will say when we collect data, and NORC at the University of Chicago is our data collection agent. They'll keep the contact information confidential. When we get the data at BJS, we'll always keep it separated. Contact information will never be joined with survey responses. We want to keep things as particularly our respondents as confidential as possible, realizing that internally we want to know who the offices are. When we report the data, we need to design reports that some of it will look like the 2007 report, since we probably won't be doing the same thing, making a data set available. Probably won't, since we won't be doing something like 2007, making fully identified data set available freely. We are considering different options for keeping things confidential, but it just won't be available freely. When we do reporting, you won't be able to pick out any offices. You won't be able to pick out New York or Chicago or LA. We want to make sure the report is designed to be maximally useful, not just for things like popular media and but also for the offices, if they want to do some comparisons with kind of where they're at, a rural office or say a mid-sized city office. We want to make sure those comparisons can be done. And we're trying to consider other things to give back to our respondents that would be useful for them, but wouldn't be identifying for anything. But kind of the big thing I hope we take away from this is BJS is certainly concerned with data security and privacy, and the entire criminology field has become more and more concerned over time. And so we're thinking about disclosure issues pretty much constantly, but our reporting plans are part of that is to make sure no particular office is ever identified, no respondents ever identified. And we can talk about other things around the survey as questions come up.
Thank you, Ryan. So as promised, I'm going to let Heather Hall speak, but we do have a number of questions. So after Heather, I'll go Lindsay, Bob Barukowitz, Michael Johnson, and Beatrice. But first, Heather, please.
Sure. I don't have much to add that hasn't been already said, except that I know at NAPD it was a big push for our work there to describe how the practice of public defense had changed over time, both in terms of like practical change and cultural change in terms of like scope of services and ideology, and citing 2007 data kind of sucks because it's so old. And so I just want to just add that on a sort of global, comprehensive, big picture education tool, this census seems to provide a really exciting opportunity to update some pretty old data, hopefully for an increase in resources to serve the folks we serve better. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Let's see. Lindsay Bendel, if you're able to unmute, could you ask your question, please?
Yeah, so my question, I also put it in the chat, is around like qualitative exploration. Has there been any discussion into like a qualitative exploration of kind of the distrust of sharing this information, and or what some of these office heads might be more comfortable with sharing that could get us closer to the intended outcome?
Do you have a response to that? I think the categorical answer is no, but obviously this is what we're doing impressionistically now. So I wonder if folks have a response to Lindsay's question.
One of the things that we're trying to do, think through at BJS, is to make the and actually we're talking about as a group is how do we make the data useful, but kind of address the concerns particularly that Tina came up with, but we've heard the same themes through a number of potential respondents, and certainly some of it is just straight up technical. Like I said, separating respondents from kind of the responses. Some of it is kind of statutory. We don't let anyone use the data. BJS has never let anyone use the data for investigative purposes or and when I say investigative purposes, I mean really looking for this particular response from whatever it is an outlier, and we're going to do something about that. But these are technical responses to that. One of the things that we're really trying hard with is designing reports, designing products that can answer a lot of questions and will hopefully be sufficient for the field, but that are going to go through disclosure review to make sure you can't identify anything. And as Andy said, if there's not enough responses, we just won't report it, because maybe we get something biased and one part of the survey will only say New England states can answer. Well, we're not going to report anything like that. So there's kind of certain technical things that we can do. I mean, we are protected statutorily from releasing any data, and that's never been violated. But I mean, those are kind of the answers that BJS can give like immediately, but we are still thinking through this.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I haven't been involved in like this part of it, but I mean, I think one thing that came up in some of our like planning discussions was this idea that now like public defender offices provide more information in like annual reports than they did in the past, and that I think a lot of the information, almost all of it or a lot of it that would be collected, is sort of already in those kinds of reporting mechanisms. So I mean, I think in terms of figuring out what people are comfortable reporting, like that could potentially serve as a template, not requiring offices to report any more than what's in sort of already those kinds of reports. unless they're comfortable doing so. So things like that could be possible options, I think. And I do encourage, like, I think people to think through, like, what are the kind of things that they think might be in this survey that, like, be specific, not just sort of, I mean, it's understandable and easy to have like this general unease, but I would encourage people to think specifically about things that they would be uncomfortable seeing in a survey.
I feel like as social work researchers, we see the value a lot of time in, you know, qualitative analysis. And I would be so interested to see the themes that come up in an exploration of this, you know, this maybe not full willingness to share, and how that could maybe also like create a line of trust because you're working with the offices themselves to figure out, to put the ball in their court. I don't know, that would be fascinating to me as a very new and fresh researcher.
Thank you, Lindsay. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jen.
if I could jump in, because I think Beatrice, to your question about what, you know, gives me some pause, or what has, before I was talking before the prep meeting, when I was able to sort of share my concerns with the research team and Ryan, and then Ryan was like, okay, Mel, that's a good point. Let's see how we can change the way in which we report it. And, you know, no shock here, Bob Berukowitz, you know, former chief, right? You're sort of honing in on some of my concerns, which is we have a DOJ that seems to not really want to follow a rule of law. And so anytime we say something's protected by law or protected by statute, one has to pause these days to be like, is that enough? It seems to not be in some circumstances. And, you know, the overreach of, and certainly the government taking selective actions against universities and higher education, where it might, where those places of education and learning seem to contradict what might be a national trend from the federal government, whether it be, you know, immigration, LGBT, trans communities, DEI, you name it, right? All those things have me concerned, because that is the work that we do as public defenders. And those are the communities we serve. Specifically, you know, something that I didn't think I ever had to worry about, right? Being from New York City, being the oldest, right, and largest public defense organization, in a blue state, being in a blue state seems to present a potential risk these days, because, again, similar to the educational systems and places of learning, they seem, if the policies of the state or city do not align with the federal government, you're in the crosshair. And so one of the things that I certainly was concerned about would be the naming of offices or states when even in the aggregate data that would be, you know, sort of compared with perhaps more favorable states that are in line with federal policies or not in the crosshairs, and then and what that would mean. That being said, Aaron's right in that, and Legal Aid Society is a nonprofit, right? So we have to file a 990 as an organization. Well, our budget numbers are there, and things such as that nature. But what I do worry about always is, what is the type of data that can ever be weaponized against our clients, right? So when you look at, you know, if you're asking us things that may point to a particular community or identity of client, whether that be our non-citizen clients, or do we serve LGBT clients? Again, very proudly, we would want to answer, of course we do. That is our mission and our mandate. But of course, saying that would potentially weaponize against the people that we want to protect. So it's always with that mind. But I do think hearing, and I love the idea of, sort of asking, what are the types of data we do want to share? I do want to know what my attrition rate is as a metro area large office compares against other attrition rates. That's important to me, especially as I'm have a union and negotiating contracts with them, to which retention is a key issue, and now using that to advocate with my funders, my city and state funders. So those are really things that are important. But that's where my concerns come from. And when I'm talking to other defenders, I think it is where it's coming from as well.
Thank you, Tina. And thank you, Lindsay. I want to emphasize that, Bob, I'm going to come to you in just a second, but I think Lindsay, your question isn't just about us. Your question is for us. We're in this session right now answering your question. And this is happening right now. And so I really appreciate you raising it. But I actually wonder if, in the context of this conversation, we're kind of learning answers. Like, certainly BJS doesn't have to be here offering any kind of insight into this. They could remain at a distance. And there's a sense, everything has changed since January 1st of this year. But last year, we were, as a research team, very concerned about people not responding to this survey. And the answers at that time were, we're partnering with NAPD, which is a trusted name in the field. We're going to have a really thorough follow-up situation where we're going to ask people and address their concerns. We're going to try and demonstrate the utility and the value of what we're doing in lots of different ways. And we're going to involve defenders in the developing of the survey, which we also did. All of those efforts to kind of, bridge this gap and answer this question in advance are completely changed now by our new context. But I really appreciate your question, and I want to be super explicit that this conversation we're having right now is an attempt to answer it in real time. But I want to pass to Bob, because I know he's had several questions.
Thanks, Andy. And, for those who don't know me, I'm a professor now at Seattle U Law School. I was chief defender in Seattle for 28 years, and I've been very involved in research and assessments. I really respect what Andy is doing, and I respect what Tina is saying. I want to say several things. In terms of what you're looking at, I think independence is something that should be part of this survey. And I don't have an immediate suggestion on the questions, but finding out, do people feel like they're independent? What is their structure? Because to me, independence and workload are the key issues for defenders. It's really important to have this data. The more data we have, the better it is. Trying to compare workload to outcomes is really tricky, and I don't know exactly what kind of conclusions you might draw from that. One thing I've learned over time is that trial rates are really important, but if you have prosecutors that are dumping cases quickly and you have a high dismissal rate, the trial rate doesn't have to be as high if you're getting 50% of your cases dismissed. I'm really concerned in a way that I wouldn't have been a year ago about what the Justice Department is going to do and the independence of BJS. And I respect what Ryan is saying, but what Tina said is really true. Statutes don't make a damn bit of difference to this government. And I'm just really concerned about Elon Musk's teenage computer people getting involved in sticking their nose into what Aaron and Ryan are doing and saying, we don't care. We're going to just take the data. We're going to run you out of your office. We're going to shut down the University of Chicago if they don't give us the data. And I'm really, really concerned about that. As a former chief, I think having the data is really, really useful. What Tina said about comparing attrition rates and trying to use that as an advocacy tool with your funders and trying to figure out what we can do together to reduce attrition rates. I'm just worried that this process, because of the current government, is going to divide people rather than bring us together. What NAPD has been trying to do for the last decade plus is to bring us together, to be stronger, and to have more data, and to advocate more effectively. I wouldn't have believed I would be saying this a year ago, but watching what's happened with the government trying to invade all the things that defenders are trying to do, protect people of color, protect gay people, protect trans people, protect immigrants, all of those things are targets, and they're all considered to be bad now. And we used to think they were good, that we were working on those things and we were trying to advance those things. And so I'm just really concerned about how independent BJS is really going to be, how protected the University of Chicago is really going to be, how protected NAPD and the Decent Center are going to be. I'm just really concerned about it. And to the extent that some of these things can be identified in a combined effort with the chiefs that are going to respond, I'm very concerned. I also am curious about how you're going to identify, maybe NAPD's already done this, but the number of contract defense law firms, just in our state alone, there's dozens of them. And if you're not going to be looking at city defender programs, only at county ones, then you're missing all the misdemeanor, or a lot of the misdemeanor cases. So I'm sorry for rambling on. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I really appreciate the integrity of the people doing this, but I'm worried about the people funding it, and I appreciate whatever you can do to help us respond to that.
Anybody have responses on that one? Ryan, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I mean, there is a response that there is the technical response. The data are encrypted. The folders are per user access. Nobody gets to touch the data unless we say so. That is, if you, that said, there are system admins, and there have been data that have been used, but there are data that the administration has used. I will say it's all been operational data. The administration hasn't touched any statistical data they have been more than willing to close offices like the Department of Ed than they have to worry about data. That's about all I can say. We can make sure that everything's encrypted at the University of Chicago. And NORC is doing this. They're already doing this. This is just what they do. Because they're worried about data security. It's encrypted in transit, it's encrypted here. One of the things that I think the group that has redesigned the survey, and I came after that, did very smartly, is only ask for questions. The only questions you see are questions that are kind of the minimal amount of questions to answer these things about caseload, about attrition. So you won't see anything like, do you serve different types of population? Because that, while you would like to know that, you can't make the survey 5 hours long, kind of the practical thing, but it's not, that's not targeted toward the questions that really need to be answered. Everything is optional on the survey. Once you get in the survey, if there's something that somebody doesn't want to answer, skip it. And we, of course, want everything, but some things can be skipped, and some things will have to be skipped. So we can, there are, I mean, there are kind of things that I can't address, but the things that we can, I think the team's done a very good job designing the survey, being thoughtful about research, the research questions, and of course, BJS and all of the statistical agencies' routine kind of business for protecting data and keeping things confidential is kind of what I can offer. I will say with the city one, to address your city question, the contract question, we had to make a decision, and this is a decision we made to get something restarted because the last CPDO was 2007. Of course, you want to go back and talk to and survey other kind of contract offices, but we kind of had to make a decision. That's the decision we came down on.
Thank you, Ryan. I want to move us on to make sure we do cover everybody, but just to be super explicit, the decision was that our public defender office is defined either as a full-time government agency or a 501c3 with full-time lawyers. And actually, I can't remember the exact wording, but the answer is that a contract defender, unless they're a non-profit, I don't believe would be in scope for us. Heather, I'm sure will know better. But I do have a list of Michael Johnson, then Beatrice, then Josh Harson, if you wanted to add anything, Ryan Dratler, and then Anne Christian. So Michael Johnson, if you're still on, could you unmute and say your question, please?
What I was wondering if these studies have a qualitative analysis of the variables, the quantitative variables in the 2007 study as it affects each variable as it affects case outcomes, and doing a qualitative analysis on those variables in relation to case outcomes.
Aaron, your study was obviously a quantitative analysis of the relationship between these variables and case outcomes. Do you have a response for Michael?
My understanding is that that data is not available, and I also want to be super clear that, at least to my recollection, there's nothing in this specific data set about the outcomes of cases. To address that question, I had to link data on like public defender offices and some of their characteristics to a completely different data set. So I don't think like the purpose of this survey is specifically to address the issue of like how these things contribute to outcomes. As a researcher, I try to do that in like a creative way, but no, so I don't think there's qualitative data to that. I mean, I think it would be super interesting, but my guess, and Ryan or Andy could correct me, is that that might be beyond the scope of this specific survey.
I think that's exactly right. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, the survey collects plenty of data that implicitly might be related to outcomes like caseloads and things like that. But really, it's a portrait of those things across the public defender field, and there's not an ability, unless, like Aaron, you bring in more data to look at those empirical relationships. Beatrice, I know Beatrice Halbach Singh had a specific question for Tina. Beatrice, do you want to add to it, or has it been answered? I
believe Beatrice is no longer here.
Thank you for tracking that, Doran. I appreciate
No
it.
problem.
Josh Harson had a comment about Kansas's participation. Josh, did you want to add an explanation of your state's decision?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have a ton to add what I wrote. I just wanted to note that we at least had decided to participate. And it did include a review of the questions and sort of what information we, felt like they were asking for, and also maybe just I understand, the administration is not trustworthy to say the least, but it didn't feel like that we were necessarily risking much with the way the questions are asked and the responses they're asking for. And the other part of it was, I, as a researcher, this is information that I would like to have access to, and that played into it as well, that if it's something that I want to use, then I feel like I should be participating in the survey and offering what we have for our state.
Yeah, thank you, Dosh. Ryan Dratler, I'm going to skip you for a moment because you have a big question. Anne Christian had a very targeted one. Anne, do you mind sharing what you were wondering about?
Well, my first question was how a public defender office is defined for the survey, and that's been partially answered as far as a state office or a nonprofit organization. And Bob Baruchowitz brought up Washington State being county-based public defense, and I'm most familiar with Oregon, which has been for decades state-based. And so the survey, for example, to Oregon, that would go to the state office for Oregon and any nonprofit contractors in Oregon.
I can take a chance at this one if you want, Andy. So for Oregon specifically, it would only go to the state office if the state office provides direct services. If they are solely an administrative office, it would not. Although in Oregon, I think they do handle some cases. The frame for the Census of Public Defender offices was any public defender office in the country that had at least one full-time attorney and was either a unit of some kind of government or a nonprofit. It did exclude private contracted law firms, which are fairly common in Washington, at least, and I think there may be some in Oregon. It excluded those offices, but every other office was attempted to be included. And Andy showed a slide at the beginning. I think our current frame has about 1,400 offices throughout the country, which is up by almost 500 from the 2007 data. There has definitely been a rash of office building, but we also spent like 4 to 6 months scouring a whole bunch of sources, court data, Google, state government pages, et cetera, to try to find every single staff public defender office in the country. And that's where these censi will be directed, trying to get at that office level data. We haven't talked.
Huge, Heather. You know, it's so much better than in the past. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think, I don't know if we want to touch this topic, but it is, it's been an adjustment, I think, for some of the state leaders to allow a survey collection effort that asks individual office data. But what has happened historically is that more organized systems report data and less organized systems don't. And it's this giant black hole of not knowing. And this census was really designed to improve on those data efforts and really create a more comprehensive, arguably the most comprehensive data set about just public defense delivery that's ever been undertaken. And it is a long and lengthy definition. We could certainly put it out. It's limited to criminal defense work and juvenile delinquency work. And yeah, I don't want to go on and on about it. I put a small note in the chat as well.
So Heather, you answered my second question. My final question was whether the survey includes questions about expenditures, costs. How much does it cost to run an office?
Andy's really the survey instrument guru, but we don't do any of that analysis beyond capturing total budgets and total caseloads, which someone could, make a fairly crude analysis there, but it wouldn't be particularly accurate. We designed this survey. We know everyone's busy. The longer you make a survey, the less likely they are to take it. We anticipated the burden of this survey to be an hour. When we did our cognitive testing, many people were able to finish it in substantially less time than that. But that does mean we don't ask for any kind of detailed analysis. We ask for data that we hope is largely at people's fingertips. And Andy, I don't know if you want to say more, because I definitely don't want to misrepresent the answer on that. But that certainly seemed like a sensitive question that we weren't going to suggest that anyone answer. But maybe Andy can say maybe where more nefarious minds might try to manipulate what's actually in the survey. So
no, that's exactly.
I'm being mindful of time because other people have questions, but I would just be hesitant about asking for any cost information, and I'll tell you why, is depending on how many people respond, blah, blah, blah. Having cost information, and I'll just speak from experience, in a national study can really help or hurt jurisdictions. So Maria Beeman's on here. When I started in Oregon in 1988, there was a Spangenberg Group report from, I believe, 86. So I walked into an office with a national report saying Oregon was the 4th highest state as far as public defense expenditures. And having been a public defender in Oregon, it was like, what? Sure didn't seem that way. And so that's the basis for me asking, how do you define public defender office? You've done beautiful work, Heather, as far as current survey. Are we looking only at criminal as opposed to large amounts of money in many states spent on non-criminal cases for public defense? The apples and oranges and the adverse impact or positive impact for states who report cost information, you know,
Yeah,
in a different way. Do you know what I'm saying?
if an office is exclusively doing a practice that's outside the criminal practice, like let's say a child in need of care or a family law, then they are excluded from this census frame and do not get this survey. If they're a mixed,
They are primarily.
If they're a mixed practice, the survey is very clear about only responding budgetarily, caseload, staffing, et cetera, to the portions of the practice that are criminal or juvenile delinquency.
Good. Thank you.
One additional point I think I'd make based on what like Ryan has shared is that you wouldn't be able to group this at the state level, right? So you wouldn't be able to make state-based comparisons in the way like you're referring to, because the way it would be reported out would be aggregated at larger aggregates or different kinds of aggregates. So those kind of comparisons, saying like Oregon compared to Washington, wouldn't be possible.
Oh, good. And maybe sharing the survey would be helpful to some of us.
Absolutely. Claire Buto also asked, thank you, Anne. Claire Buto asked for the intro to be shared. We can not only definitely share it, but it is also out in the field. So a lot of people have copies of it. It is a final and out there. I have a copy on my desktop, which I'm hesitating to share because I'm not totally sure it's the final version. So if there's somebody here who absolutely knows, Heather, do you know?
I just Googled and OMB has it on their public website, and I just dropped the link into the chat.
Oh, that's absolutely the best solution.
And I'm going to trust that OMB is holding the official version.
Yeah, that should be the final one. So
yeah, it's just to say that we've been over this a billion times trying to make this as beneficial, safe, informative, and easy as we can. A lot of versions.
Thank you very much. Please do, if people have more questions, please do pop those. Please do either put them in the chat or stick your hand up. Let's do another round of the panel for further reflections. Oh, Ryan, I forgot you. I apologize. Please go ahead. Maybe your question will kick off the closing conversation here.
Yeah, so hi guys, I'm Ryan Dratler of the Legal Aid Society. I'm working with the team behind CPDO to increase engagement and interest in the survey. And we've raised some very important concerns that have been echoed throughout the past 6 months concerning privacy and data use. There are some elements of our setup that we can't change. We can't change that BGS is involved. I think BGS is doing a phenomenal job too, especially given the situation we are in. So I guess a good question that I'd love to hear answers to, and I think that a lot of our panelists would be interested in, is what would help you or your colleagues feel more comfortable participating in the survey? any feedback on what we could maybe do differently or strategy would be incredibly valuable.
Could I put that one back to the panel, in fact? I mean, Tina, you've already said a lot about what would make you feel comfortable. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think it's more about how the language and the ways in which it's reported. Ryan Kling, right, in our conversation talked about how to use the aggregate data, sort of washing away, using state names, using organization names, maybe just reporting out that, you know, in ways that does not, as Bob Baruchowitz said, like create an unintended consequence of pitting one office against another. I think Anne also sort of raised that as a concern too, right? Well, if you're, you know, if you're in a, and I think like even as where I'm talking about it, you can see how even without an intention saying that, you know, large metro offices report X and smaller rural offices report Y. And you could see that could always be used in some way against either of those groups. So I think we have to think that as a community about not only the questions and the answers, but when this report is written, you know, really what is the objectives, and trying to make sure that we are thinking through what we say ensures that that is the message that's driving the final product. Again, we know that people have lots of intent and will rip apart things for their benefit. But the final product needs to be one in which chiefs can use it in our advocacy, and it not be used against us or to harm our offices or our clients. And I know that that's a really large mandate, which is why it gives me pause right in this moment. And sadly, I wish we were not in this moment. I think we all agree, you know, if this were a different time and a different, perhaps, head of the federal government in this country, we would be leaning in, because I think we would really have this benefit us leaning in at this moment.
Thank you, Tina. Can I pass to you, Ryan? I mean, Tina's asked a specific question. What's the intent in the report writing? What's your response on that, since we have you here?
The intent is all BJS is going to, so there are a couple of different things when I think about a BJS report. And if you open up any of them, particularly for a census, it's exactly what you expect from any census. It is to say, what's the state of the world now? To get the top line numbers, how many public defenders, how many cases, kind of, when you look at the funding sources, it's kind of the percentage of the funding sources. Those are the attrition rates. Those are the interesting things. And you'll see the top line one, which will smash everything together because BJS likes to count things, and this is what we're counting. The question is, where do you go below that? And Tina brings up the issue. It's that anytime you do a breakdown, you might be advantaging some groups and disadvantaging others. We're researchers. But we want this to be valuable to the field. So we want breakdowns that you can't, that are valuable to the field. And the ones off the top of your head are obviously things like, do you come from a big or small place? What kinds of cases do you see? Those types of things. That's kind of the intent. That's the only intent of the report. And the question, we struggle with this all the time when we collect data. And I say that BJS, how far down do you go before you start saying, oh, don't publish that because that's going to hurt us. So we're not going to publish anything at the state level. We're just not going to do that. I will say there are breakdowns, even say large urban areas versus rural areas, and it's a valuable breakdown. At some point, there's a trade-off between what's useful versus what can be weaponized. But if we don't put anything out, then opponents can make up whatever they want. And that's always in the back of my mind too. And opponents do make up whatever they want. The intent, though, is to enumerate what's going on and to use breakdowns by things that are valuable. And that sounds really loosey-goosey, but we'll be guided by the field. The columns in the, if you think of a table, the columns are already there. They're the survey questions. The rows, we're not 100% sure yet, but that's something we would consider internally, but certainly be guided by what's valuable for the field too.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. Maybe we should focus our final thoughts on intent, because I understand not only that opponents will use the vacuum of information as a weapon, but they will also, I'm a cynic, I think they will use any information we publish as a weapon. I think that's what opponents of public defense already do, and I don't see why they would stop doing that. But at the same time, of course, information and facts can be used as a weapon by defenders. I'm always reminded of a chief of the Louisiana State Public Defender System, whose name I'm forgetting, who said that data for him was a sword and shield. And so, you know, it's something that you use as a resource in battle, as it were. But will also be used against you. As I say, as a researcher, I have this vested interest and maybe certainly a professional bias to think that more information is good and interesting. I want to actually put it to you, Aaron. You're a researcher also. As researchers, we don't like to disclose our intent, do we? Because we want to appear to be objective and simply interested in facts. Do you have anything to add to that about your intent?
Oh, well, I mean, I think this becomes a very, I think it's a really tricky conversation. I mean, I think from my perspective as someone who values public defense, I would not want us to be reporting out anything that could be obviously harmful. Again, to your point, I think any information can sort of be weaponized, but my personal intention would be to really would be not to do anything that would place public defender offices at risk, or the field of public defense at risk. As I mentioned sort of in my introduction, there are trade-offs to that in terms of what you can learn. So for instance, I think I remember, and Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I remember you saying something like you want to be able to see how your attrition rate compares to other offices. That's something you probably can't do with this data, because of some of the trade-offs that have to be made. But I think that's where, kind of to Ryan's point, the question of what the breakdowns are become important, right? So I could imagine a case where if it's amenable to people, where Tina could compare her office to other large offices to kind of see, yes, I can't see how I compare to a specific office, but I can see how I compare to other offices that are as similar as possible to mine from a component. So that could be a way to sort of potentially split the difference. But again, we have to be super careful about sort of what those breakdowns are. So I think that's, assuming people are willing to fill out the survey, which is the first piece. I think if they are, then I think figuring out sort of what breakdowns are that sort of balance the risk with the utility. Like, I think just having those conversations and figuring that out is what becomes like the critical and hard work. So that's, I guess, sort of my thoughts, Andy, but and where my intentions are.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it. And Heather, it looks like you have a response also.
Yeah, it's really kind of my closing thought here, but I was thinking about the fact that most public defender agencies are offering out some kind of public reporting, whether it's, you know, they may not get looked at by a very wide audience or not, but a lot of this survey is asking questions that is already public information. And I just wanted to add to Aaron's comment that if there is anything in the survey that you feel like where the risk outweighs the benefit of reporting it, then you are encouraged to skip that question. Not taking the survey at all out of this sort of extreme position of conservatism or, you know, risk avoidance is sort of our worst case scenario, because an incredible amount of effort will go into this. And even if 70% of our public defender folks make time to do the survey and report out and go through this grappling that they go through, it will never see the light of day. And we really are just trying to get to this baseline so that we can update data that is, you know, 20 years old. So I just wanted to say it's not an all or nothing, but we can't go scouring the internet for 990s and annual reports and try to tease this stuff out. But a lot of it is already out there and been reported because you're either statutorily obligated to report it or otherwise. So that's just all I wanted to talk. That's my earnest plea to you, is just to give the survey a chance. If there are parts of it that feel, you know, a spade too far, then skip those questions. We tried to be mindful, but we don't understand everybody's sensitivities. But something is better than nothing. And I would say that I just encourage everyone to think about, sometimes it feels like the safest thing to do is to do nothing, but I do feel like there is a really great risk of the public defender community as a community being data averse and only having data that is 1, 2, 3 decades old. So I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. I'm just trying to say that I hope that some pieces of information here, if we could collect across the 80%, would really advance the ball significantly. So.
Thank you, Heather. We have just 1 minute left. And so I'm going to close us and say, I've always thought that data are not the most important thing that public defenders do. And I say that as somebody whose entire career has depended on the fact that public defenders have been willing to give me data at times. It's not the most important thing that public defenders do. And when they're out in the field and choosing between talking to a client and filling out something on their computer screen, they should talk to the client. At the same time, the worst kind of public defender policy is the completely unintelligent public defender policy that has no facts behind it. And I also believe that. And so I think that there is an opportunity here anyway to fill some of those gaps and to move the field forward, obviously. But it has to be ranked in priorities, and it has to be situated among other concerns that people legitimately hold. I don't think that we're going to get people to fill out this survey by browbeating them about the need to fill it out. I think we're going to get people to fill out this survey, if at all, only by having these tough conversations. And so that's why I wanted to meet today. I think that right now there's a real risk that this survey will fail, that we won't make it to the 80% response rate. I don't know that there are answers that will have satisfied everybody in the room about their concerns. But I do believe that only by talking them through, and only by hearing from the people who are doing this, and only by hearing what they have to say, and of course the people who are doing it hearing what you have to say, we might reach some kind of resolution, the best possible resolution in how this is going to go. So thank you everybody for their time so very much, and thank you to IDRA for hosting this conversation.
Yes, thank you very much for presenting. The next session is in about 10 minutes, so hope to see many of you there.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.